Hello, everybody, and welcome to LGBTQ and A. And I'm here with Jules. Jules, tell us about yourself.
Oh boy, there's so many things. Uh, I like tea a lot. I like books a lot. I do live action role play and historical reenactment and fantasy games with my friends, or I would if we were doing things in person this year. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I was a swimmer in college. I play lots of different instruments, and I live in central upstate New York,
Woo! And you're originally from the
San
Bay Area,
Francisco.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. So obviously this is LGBTQ and A. So you're here because you are a member of that group.
Yeah,
Um,
super queer.
super queer. Is that your official superhero name?
I mean, it would be if I was had the outfit to go with it, but haven't had my crafting bug bite yet this year, so we're waiting on that.
Okay,
But
so
yeah,
so in a
I
few months
am.
I can expect to see.
Yeah,
Okay, awesome,
give me the winter. We'll see. We'll see what I can come up with.
gotcha. So that's
Uh,
how you describe your identity as queer.
yeah. So generally, I call myself queer, but specifically, my gender identity is that I am genderqueer specifically and non-binary,
Gotcha.
and both of those are slightly different terms that sometimes encompass some of the same things. So that's why I use both of them instead of just one.
Gotcha.
For me, the fact that I am non-binary is because I don't feel like woman or man both would or either would adequately describe who I am as a
Mhm.
person in terms of my gender. So non-binary meaning not at either of those 2 points on the sort of typical binary spectrum that we have been led to believe is the norm.
Right.
And it turns out that not only could you be one of those, both of those somewhere in the middle, there's also all of the space around that where you
Sure.
could end up. So I don't necessarily feel like my gender is on a direct line between woman and man. And so I am non binary. Also, I am genderqueer because I feel that I have always had the same gender. I don't think that that's necessarily changed for me over the course of my life. But and so, for instance, gender fluid would not be the right
Right.
word for me because I don't feel that my gender is changing or has changed. And I do feel like I have a gender, so I wouldn't call myself a gender.
Right.
Um, so lots of different words
Lots of
available.
terminology to throw out there.
Yeah, the two that I tend to stick the closest to are genderqueer and non-binary.
Gotcha. And just because I want to make sure I participate equally, I am a straight man. I'm married. I have a wife. I have a child. He was just in here right before you came on.
Oh,
Um, he wrote me a very early Christmas card because
oh,
we put
lovely.
up our Christmas stuff today in November. So he's in the spirit. Um,
Excellent.
yeah. So I pretty recently started going by gender queer.
Kind of. So over the last few years, I started using they, them pronouns.
Hmm.
Um, and most recently, I started going by Jules, which has always been one of my nicknames, but started like I changed my Facebook display name and I've been signing emails as Jules for the last couple months now.
Right.
So yeah, so this is definitely still an in progress thing for me at 29 years old. Um, but yeah, so 2.5 years ago, I think, is when I started going by using they them pronouns and actively claiming genderqueer and non-binary for myself.
Gotcha.
So
Okay. So
relatively recent, but like in the way that you finally find the word for the thing that's been true the whole time and you go, oh yeah, okay, cool, now I have vocabulary.
right.
So it's not
So
like,
you're most of your life you've felt this way, and
yeah,
now you've finally found the, not to like say official, but like the,
yeah, but like words that work better than the words that I had before.
right. So you've
Yeah,
you've learned enough about whatever
all
and,
of the
and
different possible
life.
vocabularies. Yeah,
Right.
and I mean the sort of societal understanding of gender and orientation and everything that makes us people, are all of the parts of our identities, is continuing to evolve, and we are getting new words. We're getting better understanding of old words. Just
Right.
constantly. So I feel quite happy and solid with genderqueer, and I'm not discounting the possibility that a few years down the line maybe there's another word that I learn that fits even better.
Maybe you'll
So
make it up. Maybe you'll be the
yeah, right,
pioneer.
exactly. Right.
Yeah, it'll be the Jules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's your what's your identity? I'm the Jules.
I'm the Jules. It's me. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's how a lot of people are actually coming to an understanding of just like not only are there more than two possible genders, there are technically as many genders possible as there are people.
Right.
Like everybody's
Absolutely.
experience of gender and their identity in terms of gender, like yeah, we tend to think that there are boxes that people fit in or categories that people fit in, and that's not like not true.
Mhm.
But I my experience with gender and orientation has very much been that the words that I grew up with were almost right.
Right.
Like they were part of it, but not all of it.
Mhm.
And so it took a really long time because I don't experience the same kind of like gender dysphoria that
Right.
other trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people do. So I've
Right.
been lucky on that front in that, you know, things were not right with the other names and the other words and the other pronouns, but they weren't like it's more like a paper cut than like a
Then
body blow.
right.
So it took me a really long time to realize that actually, just because most of me fits into this box doesn't mean that that's the box that describes all of me.
Right.
So that's been definitely my experience. And I know for a lot of people who are exploring not necessarily changing their gender, but finding the better words to describe themselves,
Mhm.
it's a lot of like, oh, maybe I am just me. Maybe I am just Jules. Maybe there isn't actually a
A word
pre-existing
for it yet.
category that works perfectly.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's how it always works on anything, right? Like when you look at an official form, you have to
mhm,
go through and you're like, okay, which
yeah,
one of these is me? And
right.
like for me, it's really easy because I fit into the standard, you know, I'm Caucasian, I'm a male,
The
I'm
forms are
straight.
already set up for you.
The
Yeah,
forms are set up for me, right?
right.
And for people like people like you or people who are kind of seeking that answer, um, you know,
Yeah.
there is no form for you yet.
Right, and,
Um,
it also depends so very much on, like, the specific circumstances, so who I'm talking to, why we're talking,
right.
and so to use your form metaphor, like, I'm not out at work because I don't really care about the people that I work with knowing who I
Mhm.
am to the fullest level,
Sure.
and so for me, it's not a safety thing necessarily, but it is a how much energy am I willing to expend on making these people understand something that's not natural to them to understand?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so, like, I would still, in those forms, I would still check woman, I would still check straight.
Right.
Where if I was hanging out with a bunch of my friends, I don't feel the need to do that because we understand in that context that there are more options and the options that I want are already on that form.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool, cool, cool. And you know, this is absolutely not in any way the same as what you were just talking about, but this is the closest I can relate. So I'll go for it. So when I stopped teaching and I started working in more blue collar jobs,
Mhm.
um, I found like I guess I don't want to like equate my situation to you, but like I started realizing and I talked with Taylor in my last video about this as well, how like I started meeting people who did not prescribe to my worldview, even in Appleton, which I
Yeah.
had thought was very homogenous, and it's obviously very not. I've realized that now. But
Right.
like, but you know, it's like it's one of those things where it's like there are certain things that I believe to be true and they're immovable and they're facts, and that's a lot of that is we all live on this spectrum and our identity is made up of all these different pieces, and I meet these people who are very solidly in the older view of there are only two genders, there are
Right.
only two sexes,
Right.
those things are the same thing, not different.
Yeah.
It's clear they've never taken a gender studies course. Um,
I mean,
and
I haven't either, and it took a while to figure out that that was a thing that was like missing from my vocabulary. But you're right;
right,
it's weird once you start to look into this and you start to realize how widespread diversity can be. to
Right.
realize how many people don't know that.
Yeah, or like that terminology doesn't exist for people.
Yeah.
And it's like, in my world, I've known about this, at least in like the smallest amount, for a long time now, for almost like 8 years. And
Yeah.
like it's crazy to me still that people haven't at least been exposed to it in some way.
Right.
But then I think about like all the things that are happening in our country, and I'm like, oh wait, never mind.
Yeah. Turns out that too is its own form of privilege, is not realizing how many people don't know this.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
100%. Now I'll own up to that.
Yeah,
Like,
same.
yeah, it's like, oh, I haven't been doing a good enough job. Darn it.
Yep, there's always more work to do, and it's good to, like, I think that it's really useful to know, to start understanding how much there is left to do, how
Yeah.
much work, both on a personal and a societal level.
Hmm.
I think that once you actually have some kind of understanding of where you're at, it gives you a more firm place to start learning from.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
for the pronouns example,
Mhm.
I've known since, like, literally as far back as I can remember. I can pick out a couple of specific instances when I was like 8, 10 years old, but as far as I can tell, my whole life I have felt uncomfortable with she and her as
Sure.
descriptors of me.
Hmm.
But it took me until I was like 26, 27 years old to figure out that there were alternatives that are just kind of
Right.
available and exist.
Hmm.
And it's not to say that they're freely available or that they are as available for everyone equally. Some people have an easier time choosing and claiming their right pronouns or their right name than other
Hmm.
people do. And
Absolutely.
I had a very easy time with it once I realized it was a thing. Um, so like my experience should not count as a very general, like, this is how trans and non-binary people experience pronoun shifts.
Yeah.
But like for me, realizing that it wasn't just something's not quite right about this, but I guess it's okay. But like, hey, it doesn't have to be this way.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden I was like, wait, what? I can change that?
I'm going to, so thank
I'm
you.
going to. Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So I think that part of progress is knowing where you are, and especially if that means finding out that you are very early on in what looks like a and what is
A
a
very long
basically
journey.
lifetime journey of just discovering who you are,
Hmm.
discovering where you fit in the world, what society is actually like, not just what you think it's like.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, you know, I don't actually have anything to say about that. You summarized it very well. I'm trying to be two-sided in this conversation, and you're knocking it out of the park. So I'm just gonna
The
keep
thing
pushing on.
I ask more questions. We'll figure it out.
Okay, I will ask more questions. So, like you had said, you kind of recently came about this description of your identity, and I know personally that very recently you started sharing it with at least with me. I know that like I found out only a couple months ago.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so what kind of, I don't want to say drove you, but what was like the deciding factor in saying, all right, I'm going to put this out there for people now instead of earlier or waiting or
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
So I'm gonna preface this by saying that I'm just junk at keeping up with people. Even people that I was very good friends with in college,
right.
even people that I'm like related to and like a lot. Like I'm real bad at actually keeping in touch with people in a good year. And this has
Been
not
a
been a good
crazy year.
year. So yeah, I don't like I call my mom every day, and now we live close enough together and we're in the same like quarantine pod that we see each other every day.
Right.
Uh but she's basically the extent of that. I have my various group chats on Facebook and my various Facebook friends that I talk to daily,
Mhm. Right.
but everybody else, I still love them and I still enjoy having them in my life, and it just doesn't occur to me to tell people when I make discoveries or decisions about my life. Like
Life altering
it
decisions.
yeah, it tends to take me on average a year to tell all of my family when I have moved. So like that's our baseline. And then, you know, finding out this thing, and part of it is because for me, it wasn't like a new thing for me. This
Oh,
was
sure.
just
Yeah.
better vocabulary to describe something that had been true. So it took me a really long time to start realizing, oh, right, I haven't told so and so, or like, oh, so and so's using the wrong pronouns. That's my fault. I haven't actually told them yet.
Yeah. I haven't done anything
So
about this.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of who I am as a person, and I enjoy that about myself because there's no alternative. I have tried not to be like that. It doesn't work. So part of why it took me so long to not necessarily be public, but to like be proactive
Hmm.
about telling people is
Right.
just that's who I am as a person, and it happens.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of why I started actually talking about it proactively and publicly, I am part of a group at the local Unitarian Universalist Church that is
Hmm.
the inclusion team for like LGBTQIA plus um, congregation members and community members. And so we've been trying to do things at the church occasionally that are like, hey, let's talk about pronouns, or hey, let's talk about, Trans Day of Remembrance is coming up on this coming Friday. FYI, that's a thing.
Right.
And so one of the things that we did was we helped make the service for National Coming Out Day, which was on October 11th, I think.
Gotcha.
And so as part of that, a few of us were writing like personal things to talk about our identity, about where we fit in the queer community, in the church community, and so on.
Right.
So I always do better with deadlines than without them, and I always do better with external motivation than internal motivation.
Right.
So it was really great because I got to write this cool thing and talk about myself to a bunch of people, and it was kind of like the kind of lazy where you do all of the work at the beginning so that you don't have to do any work at the end, like
Yeah.
carrying all of the groceries in one go from the
Yeah.
car
Absolutely.
instead of making multiple trips. So once I had written this piece, it was really easy to just tweak a couple things and post it straight to Facebook and be like, check it out, y'all, wrote this thing.
Yeah. It's a thing that I am. So
It's
here.
a thing that's true about me, and I already did all the work for this completely unrelated reason. So here's this thing that I'm
So
posting.
I'm just gonna keep sharing it.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so I have not felt that I have been like in the closet basically ever. It's more like I it's like standing in the doorway and realizing like, oh, you can actually there's no door here. I can just kind of
Walk
I
out.
can go out whenever I want to.
Hmm.
With the exception of, like I said, I'm not out at my workplace because I'm quite honestly not willing to have that conversation with people that I don't really care about, like
Care that much
personal
about.
friends kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
If we can be coworkers and they don't need to know this, then that's great because I am sure that the conversation would go fine.
Right.
Also, it would take a lot of energy, and I don't have that this year. So,
Heck yeah. I
yeah,
don't think anybody has that kind of energy this
pretty
year.
sure nobody does. Yeah,
It's not. It's
and
not the year for that.
right.
Actually, it's not the year for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
for sure. So okay. So you never really felt like you were in the closet, um, which is a nice feeling, I bet, because from what I understand, being in the closet is awful.
Right. And I can definitely again say that this is not a standard experience for a lot of people.
Oh, right, absolutely,
Like
and that's
I grew
okay.
up, yeah, I grew up in San Francisco in, the mid and late 90s.
Right.
I went to a progressive, private high school. I had a lot of people around me that were varying levels of queer, varying levels of out. We still didn't talk about it a whole lot, which is kind of interesting. Like,
That is
they're
interesting.
gay and lesbian were very normal and visible and understood like things
Things.
in
Right.
my life, and I knew both adults and youth who were gay, who were lesbians. It turns out I knew more trans people than I thought I did, and I think I'm reasonably sure that either I was just completely oblivious, which is totally possible, or we straight up just didn't talk about trans in the same way that we were talking about gay and we were talking about lesbian. So we weren't talking about transgender as the same kind of being normalized, being part of the scenery. Even in my, pretty idyllic San Francisco hippie upbringing.
Right. Well, I
So
would say like,
like,
yeah, because where I grew up, we didn't talk about that period. That wasn't
right,
part of the dialogue. It was
right.
all about, it was like when the gay marriage fight first started
Yep.
when Bush was elected,
Yeah.
all of a sudden that became a huge part of everybody's vocabulary, in my
Yeah.
school at least. And I think we were in like what, like fourth grade or something like that.
Somewhere
But
around
like
there, yeah.
it was, yeah, it was, but all of a sudden that was something that I know in my town was something you didn't want to be,
Yeah.
because people were gonna, you know, shred you
Because
apart
hate
for
crimes
it.
are a thing. Yeah,
Oh
right.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And my school in particular, it was very much, like if that was what someone called you, that was on like the top list of uh-oh, you better write this thing,
Right.
because right. And it really defined how I viewed masculinity and how I viewed,
Yeah.
just in general gender growing up, because
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, because I was bullied already for not those things, and
Yep.
so having that thrown onto it was
Hmm.
like, oh, it was
Yeah,
just more
right.
onto
Just
the
an
pile. So it was like, well, I
additional
better
thing.
make sure that I'm not perceived that way.
Right.
And then I don't really it wasn't really until like the end of high school and when I got to Lawrence where I was like, who cares? And like, I know I'm not gay, but I can do what I want, because
Right.
if somebody's gonna say that I am, I'll be like, fine, I'm happy that if you see me
There's
that way,
nothing
'cause it's
wrong with
definitely
that
better than
and
you, sort of
whatever.
thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that this is one of those really interesting generational things where, you know, the millennial experience of what's cool and what's not in our high school specifically years is super different from what Gen Z is getting, what
Oh yeah.
like and
Or just the group before us.
even yeah, just it's we're the sort of like weird transitional space
Hmm.
where we grew up with the internet, but we also remember not having it at all.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that part of that, in terms of the vocabulary that we used and that we use now to describe issues of identity and inclusion and intersectionality, my experience in high school was that your identity was inseparable from your orientation.
Yeah.
So your gender and your orientation were linked somehow. And
Hmm.
again, I might have just been super oblivious to conversations that were happening around me. That's pretty likely. I do know that the study of gender as a separate thing from an orientation is a lot older than we tend to think that it
Oh,
is. Like
yeah,
people
absolutely.
have always been queer. History is very queer. Like
Alexander the
this is
Great.
stuff that yeah, this is stuff
Yeah.
that people have known about for a long time.
Right.
And my experience growing up in that time was that we didn't talk about gender by itself. We talked about gender and orientation, usually
Very
only
much
by
linked.
talking about your orientation.
Yeah.
And so, since at the time I was pretty sure I was straight, it did not occur to me to interrogate that, to question that,
Right. Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that lasted all the way through college. And I mean, like, I still remember freshman year when everybody showed up to this tiny little liberal arts school in Wisconsin, and people were coming from even more liberal places than I was coming from, but people were coming from conservative places. People were coming from big cities, small towns, different
Right.
states, same state. And everybody was kind of using, particularly freshman year, I thought, but probably the whole college experience, as a really excellent time to start screwing around and trying other things that they hadn't been
Hmm.
able to before.
Right.
And so I noticed that a lot of my friends were just like all of a sudden very queer, very gay, very lesbian because they hadn't been able to
Yeah. They
express
were
that sides
stuck
of themselves.
before.
So,
Yeah.
like, here's a fun story. I sat down one time and I was like, so am I gay? Hmm, let's think about that. And I started going through like different scenarios in my head, like trying to think about what would I feel like in these situations.
Sure.
And I was like, nope, don't think so. Think straight. Yeah, cool.
Mhm.
Yep, pretty much just straight. Cool. And then I just, stopped thinking about it for a while. So I gave it a good college try
Yeah.
freshman year to consider the possibility that maybe I was not straight. And I don't know, maybe it was true at that time. I think that my orientation has certainly changed more than my perception of my gender has.
Right.
So right now, all I can land on is queer or not straight, because it seems like this is still a conversation that's evolving in me. So this idea of separating gender from orientation is something that has definitely come to me very much later in life
Right.
than other people. So that one I'm still trying to work out. But yeah, I think that part of that is kind of the generational vocabulary has shifted so much.
Hmm.
And the nice thing is that it's pretty much never too late to start thinking about this. And, trying to figure out who you are at any given moment is a very complicated question, but it's also kind of fun. Like, it's
Well, yeah.
really hard. You have to open yourself up to the possibility of truth and of
Right.
vulnerability, which is really difficult. And this year is not necessarily the year to do that. Like, it's okay if you put this off.
Yeah.
But also, if you're 30 and you think you're straight, cool. But, what if you're not? Maybe you still are. It's one of those
Right.
things where if you grow up thinking that the defaults, the norms are
Hmm.
true, like are a
Right.
valid baseline, you might not think to question your relationship to that.
Right.
And so if you bring yourself to that point, if you can bring yourself to the point of asking, does this actually apply? Is this actually true? Is this actually fully true?
Hmm.
Not just close enough.
Right.
Then you may end up right back where you started. Like, you might go
Right.
through a whole, like, coming to yourself moment of like, oh, perhaps I am what blah 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 blah, and thinking about it and going through a, I don't want to use phase like a thing that is not true, but a phase that is a thing that is true for a while and then changes again.
Right.
And you might end up right back at, yes, I'm straight, yes, I'm cis, yes, this is my true name.
Hmm.
But I still kind of encourage that, because coming around to that on purpose is a really different feeling from just assuming that's right and
Right.
not like checking.
Hmm.
Yeah. So,
And I find that interesting because I feel like a lot of the reason that people are so anti these new, as I say, the newfangled gender things,
yeah.
right, is because they are themselves so afraid of finding out if they are different because they are very much set in their ways. And
And
so,
it's
yeah.
when you grow up with different being bad,
Hmm.
it's terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Even if you don't grow up with different being bad, like even if you grew up with a really understanding family in a, good neighborhood or a good city or someplace that makes you feel like different can be accepted, um the concept that you might be wrong about something so personal
Right.
as what you think you are like right now
Hmm.
is terrifying. And
Oh,
I
absolutely.
definitely like recognize how hard that conversation is to start in the first place.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and even if you end up finding out what's right for you, then having to then convey that to people who may not agree with you because
yep.
you've made this great self-discovery and you're like
Yeah.
really happy about yourself, but then all these people that you love and care about, you have to decide and actually actively think about, are they going to back me up here, because this isn't just, oh, I decided to get an earring,
Right.
right, mom's going to be mad at me. This is
Maybe we can have that fight and then be over it by next
right.
Thanksgiving
This
or
is this
whatever.
is one of
Yeah.
those, if we have this fight, am I going to be back for Thanksgiving this year?
Right.
Right. And that really puts up walls for people. And so even if they
Mhm.
find out they're right, that's what leads people to be like, leads people to say, well, I know this is right, but I'm not gonna think about it. I'm not gonna talk about it. They're gonna
Right.
repress. And that leads to an even worse situation, in all
Yeah.
honesty. So
It's difficult because you would like there to be an easy option for pretty much everything in our lives. It'd be great to just click a button and everything's fine. Um,
we really need to make a
and
character selector.
yeah, seriously,
Right.
I would have made some different choices if I had options. Uh, yeah, so like just being able to have the conversation is not remotely the end of it.
Yeah.
Asking yourself, is this true about me,
Hmm.
is not at all the end of it. even having an answer of yes, it turns out this is still true
Right.
isn't enough to be like, that's not a completed journey, you know.
Hmm.
And this, it's not to say that there necessarily is an endpoint, you know. This is who we are, does evolve, not necessarily always in terms of your gender or always in terms of your orientation, but we change and are changed by the decisions that we make, the environments that we're in. And I don't expect to be done asking myself, who are we right now,
Hmm.
for the rest of my life. And that's just the internal stuff. Then you add
Right.
in, how do I talk to my family about this? Do I talk to my employer about this? Is this going to affect my physical safety?
Right.
Is this going to affect my mental health? And it's really nice to have those opportunities,
Hmm.
to have those conversations, and to have those relationships shift, because when you come to a better understanding of yourself, and you can do that with the people in your life, my personal experience is that that really makes those relationships stronger in a
Hmm.
way. And it's not like they weren't good to start with. They could be perfectly acceptable, healthy, strong, good, loving relationships. And it feels really good to have those relationships also get the new updates, you know?
Yeah, like a new
Like,
reinforcement to it,
yeah,
not just, refresh it a little bit.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So it feels really good to have that happen. It's a lot of work. It is a
Mhm.
lot of work, and you have to keep doing it, and it's not over, because every single person in your life, you have to decide, is this worth it? Is this right
Right.
to do?
Mhm.
And I've been really lucky with that. I've been really lucky with my friends and my family, and the places that I come from and the places that I live.
Mhm.
um, I have asked myself a lot about, like, is it worth updating this specific person who I don't really like all that much, or like I don't talk to that often, or whatever.
Right.
And so like I still have that conversation with myself every single different time that I
Mhm.
realize, oh, this person doesn't know yet, or whatever.
Right.
But for me, the my safety has never been in question. So
Right.
that has not been something that I need to factor in.
Mhm.
Sometimes I do need to factor in, like, am I willing to have this conversation right now? Is it too late at night? Am I having a bad day? Do I want to put this off?
Right.
But they've been relatively like low level reasons to have or to not have the conversation.
Right.
Um, and so that is, especially this year when everybody is weirdly connected and disconnected from each other,
Mhm.
I would certainly say that, like, of all times, it's okay to take as much time as you need to be safe and healthy, with
Absolutely.
having those conversations with yourself and with the rest of your life.
Right.
um and like, it's legitimately okay if now is not the time. So
I would agree with that. Yeah, it's the same thing, or not, it's not the same thing, but similar. When I first started telling people about um my mental illness,
yeah.
I had similar conversations with myself. It's like, okay, do I really want to tell these people about this? Is this something I really want to put the effort into right now?
Mhm.
And you know, um, I still have those conversations, and I'm doing a lot better now than I was 2 years ago when I
Right.
started telling people about it. But like I know there was one point where it was like it was like 2 or 3 months into it, and I was just so fed up with having to remember who knew and who didn't know, and I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna post on Facebook, and whoever sees it, and whoever doesn't, well, they could just ask later. And
Yeah.
so that ended up being my thing, because I couldn't even handle it. So props to you, because that amount of like mental shifting, and like, I guess basically having to code switch between groups of people
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
was too much for me. And maybe that's just because I've never really had to deal with that kind of thing as a straight male.
Well, yeah,
um
but like also, it's one of those things where, like, no two illnesses are alike, no two
that too.
pains are alike. And
Right.
it's like, you have your internal scale of, like, here's the worst day I've ever had. Here's
Right.
the best day I've ever had. Here's where we are right now. And
Mhm.
I have, here's the worst day of my life. Here's the best day of my life. Here's where we are right now. But
Right.
it's not like you can actually compare those two scales.
Oh yeah, they're
You know,
not.
like,
They could be completely on separate planes of
right.
existence. Right.
And my easiest way to remember this is that, like, my best friend has this really excellent 3-year-old. He's going to be 4 in a couple of months. And I remember, when he falls down, or when his toy doesn't do the thing that he wants it to do, or like the train track that he's building falls over.
Right.
And that's the worst thing that's ever happened to him.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it legitimately is. And so as we develop the context of our own lives, and we have more experiences that fill in
Yeah.
that spectrum from
Right.
best thing ever, worst thing ever. But the worst thing that's ever happened to this toddler and the worst thing that's ever happened to me, it's not like they should be compared, because the
Right.
point is that they're the worst thing that's ever happened to us.
Right.
And just because maybe, bumping my head on a table isn't going to be the most pain that I've ever been in,
Mhm.
doesn't lessen the impact on him.
Absolutely. Right.
So I think that you're really right to bring up this comparison to mental health, and comparison to, like, when you get, like, fed up is a weird phrase, but when you've had enough of it, when you
Right.
decide that it is actually time to change something,
Right.
that is really valid, and it's really important to honor that kind of in a vacuum, because
Mhm.
your scale is different from everybody else's,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that's okay. Like,
Mhm.
if you've decided, nope, this is as much energy as I'm willing to expend on this, we're changing direction. That's
Mhm.
great. That's super
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
And I think that particularly when we're talking about mental health, or we're talking about identity,
Mhm.
the similarities there are not necessarily topic specific, but they are similar in terms of how society teaches us to talk about things,
That's
and
true.
specifically teaches
Mhm.
us not to talk about things.
Right.
So we both grew up mostly not talking about mental health, mostly not talking about feeling different, mostly not talking about issues of identity, not just because of, like, whether it was safe to do that or not, but, like,
It just
you
wasn't
don't,
talked about.
it just wasn't talked about, and you don't learn the vocabulary unless you learn the vocabulary.
Right.
And we were not taught the same vocabulary, and we were not
Yeah.
taught the same breadth of vocabulary.
True.
So, in terms of mental health, that's a kind of thing that you have to start finding out yourself.
Right.
And sometimes people are lucky and they have family members or they have doctors who help them through that conversation.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're not. Sometimes you never figure out what's wrong because you don't have the vocabulary to know that something is wrong.
Mhm.
And so, similarly, sometimes people have role models, or they have friends or family, or, teachers or whatever, who can help them figure out, here's how identity is intersectional. Here's how all of the different pieces of you fit together. And here's some new words that you might not have heard before.
Right.
Try these on, figure out what they feel like.
Mhm.
But sometimes you literally just stumble onto it. Like, the internet has been great for me,
Right.
because as soon as I started realizing that there were other options of gender and other options of pronouns, I could go looking for it. I could
Right.
go do research, find out new words, find out the history of some of this activism, which is just massive and important.
Right.
Um, and so being able to go and find out the things that you don't know is part of how we get around that. And society doesn't make that easy. Our
No.
culture is not to talk about those things. Our
Mhm.
culture is not, and specifically the one that you and I grew up with,
Mhm.
as, like, mid to late millennials. Um, the culture is, you have to go find it yourself, and you also have to realize that you need to find it yourself.
Right.
Something that's really inspiring to me is talking to people who are younger than us, and
Mhm.
realizing that although the general sort of, like, level of discourse to me seems a little bit the same as it has been, like,
Mhm.
people older than me tend not to be talking about these things, but people my age and younger are talking about it all the time.
All the
there
time.
are there are some really amazing young people that I know, that are teenagers, that are in middle school, who are like, already exploring their gender, already exploring parts of their identity that it just didn't occur to me to
Right.
talk about, didn't occur to
Hmm.
me was a thing.
Yeah.
There was a pride event last year, 2019, nearby, and my friends and I went. We had a great time. It was pretty small. It was the first one that that particular town had thrown in a while, and it was just filled with teenagers. And they
Sure. Yeah.
had trans pride flags, they had like genderqueer flags, they were face painting each other, they were, running around being themselves in a way that was just nuts to me.
Right.
Because it's not like I grew up in a place where that wasn't okay. I grew up in a very liberal, very
Right.
welcoming community in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
There were openly gay students in almost all of my schools. I'm not entirely like I can't remember elementary school quite well enough to remember if there were openly gay kids at that point or if like
Right.
that was sufficiently discouraged. Um but like I grew up with gay people, I grew up with trans people, I grew up with people who probably use different words now than they did then to describe themselves and their pronouns.
Right.
And it just would not have occurred to me to be as informed and as uh like not intelligent and not mature in terms of like quality.
Hmm.
But like these kids have vocabularies 10 times bigger than I ever did about
Hmm.
issues of identity, issues of intersectionality.
Right.
Um, and so I do see a generational shift in a very positive direction.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just, they're still going to have a hard time. They're still going to have those conversations individually with themselves, with their families, with their friends.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm hoping that they're starting out with more words earlier
Right.
than we had
Yeah,
and
they're
more
starting
resources.
higher up the
Yeah.
ladder than we were.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with you. When I taught middle school, the people, it was surprising to me every once in a while because I taught in a pretty conservative area of Appleton with a lot of kids with very conservative views. But then every once in a while, they would just like name drop something, or they would
Yeah.
like be like, "Oh, but what about this?" And I'd be like, "Right, you haven't. This is what I would have expected the day to go, but okay, like."
I guess we'll do
I guess
that
this
now.
is what we're talking about now,
Yep.
it's like, or,
Yep.
like just like that kind of um the breadth of knowledge and then the willingness that they are to do that research.
Hmm.
And I think mostly probably it's because they saw the tail end of our generation struggle with it.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't want to have to deal with that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure I'm prepared. Or like the last 4 years probably have given at least a big chunk of those kids reasons to go out and be actively looking at it because they're like, I've seen what's happened to these people
Yeah.
who, these people that I respected who I found out didn't really care about this, or they actively cared in the wrong way. And
Right.
now I have to catch up and make sure that I know what I'm talking about so that I can defend the things I care about.
Yeah.
And I feel like, not to knock our generation, but I feel like, for all the crap that Gen Z gets for being like TikTokers or whatever, they are informed. At least they know what they're
Oh
talking
yeah.
about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
way more
And
than I ever was.
absolutely. And I
Mhm.
love that they have the resources and the internet that exists today, which is so completely different from the internet that like we had in high school or whatever.
Yeah.
They have a communication speed that is far surpassing everything that's come before it.
Oh, it's
So
instantaneous.
just instantaneous, and you
Right.
can, and I mean, memes are fun and frivolous kind of thing, and the study of memetics in terms of how we actually transfer ideas to each other,
Right.
um, I think is a super valid course of cultural study anyway. But like particularly now, just the fact that you can learn things faster, um, and
By
it's
scrolling through like a meme website.
by scrolling through random Tumblrs, you can
Right.
find out things about, yourself, about the world that would have taken not just like longer to get to in terms of a study course, but like we just don't talk about a lot of it
Right.
in school. We don't talk about a lot of it in casual conversation with like, you're in line for coffee at Starbucks and you happen to
Right.
talk about the weather. You don't necessarily happen to talk about, so let's talk about intersectional feminism. Let's, what steps have you taken this week for racial reparations.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
they'll
so
look at you like,
I super love the way that the world is making it easier for young people to become informed and to inform themselves, because
mhm,
we don't do a good enough job of doing it for them. And
yeah.
I'm saying that the we as the like greater community in our country specifically,
Mhm,
which is, you know, systemically racist and sexist and homophobic and transphobic. Um, the things that I am trying to work on internally and the things that I'm trying to absorb from intentional research and intentional like informing myself
mhm,
is that the queer um activist history is already out there and is so strong and is so important. And that's why we have as much progress as we have right now. Like
right,
trans women of color have enabled us through their literal blood, sweat, and tears to
right,
have these conversations in ways that we couldn't before.
right.
And so like when you're looking at you know, the idea of having different generations is that each one, like you were saying, starts off a little bit higher up the ladder than the one before it. And
Mhm,
we are all kind of aiming towards getting better at stuff. And if you can leave your kids knowing the same things that you do, but at a younger age, that's a
right.
really good step, because that means they have more time to go
To pick
further
up on all
and
those
their
things.
kids will have more time to go further.
Right.
And so, not to, you know, bring the tone down or nothing, the fact that our queer elders were murdered
Right.
in mass
Mhm.
by the AIDS epidemic, by a government like failure
Yeah.
and intentional failure to care for them, to care for their health and their validity, is an incredible setback and is one, you know, one of many reasons that we're not further on today than we are right now. You know, if
I
there
agree.
was that entire generation of gay men, of queer people, of,
Mhm,
you know, people who have just didn't get a chance to do anything with the knowledge that they had
mhm.
because of this horrible disease. If they had been here, if they had been around, we would be so much farther than we are now.
I mean, you can expand that to so much more,
Yeah, absolutely.
right, for in America, especially since we're, what I like to say, really good at the isms, and not at anything else. Um, we, we've systemically for centuries now, pushed down people of color, the Black community, basically just anybody who wasn't white. And to be honest, I mean, we're not particularly great at some of those things, at
We're
being innovative.
right. Yeah, we have ignored and stamped out voices that would
Right.
have helped, would
Yeah.
have been doing things. And so it is important to recognize kind of the two sides of that, both the voices that we're missing out on
Mhm.
through intentional systemic oppression and
Right.
intentional systemic erasure.
Mhm.
The voices that we're missing out on could have done so much for us. And the voices that stayed, the voices that are still here, the voices that have been doing and are doing the work are doing so much for us. And
Right.
so it is, I uplift the people in the queer community, the elders that have been there the whole time, that have managed to survive this
Right.
world
And
and are
kept it going.
continuing to make things better for all of us, and particularly for the you know, queer babies who are just starting out on this particular path, no matter how old they are. Like, you
Yeah.
know, some, hopefully that means that they're getting to it early enough that it'll really make an impact in their life to have that extra vocabulary around, whether they use it or not. But you know, I'm going to be 30 next year,
Mhm.
and I'm super looking forward to finding out what I still don't know. Like there are
Right.
there are parts of this queer history in this country and around the world that I know I have those gaps in my knowledge. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to start going to look for ways to fill that up.
Right.
And yeah, so it's just the amount of work that is being done, that has been done, and is continuing to happen even in the midst of a global pandemic and a fraught election season, and you know, multiple years of awful politics, decades of awful politics, centuries of awful politics here. Like people are still dying, people are still getting hurt, and they're also not shutting up. They're
Right.
not saying, okay, you win.
Right.
And so I find that to be humbling and inspirational, and a really good reason to go look for those questions that need to get asked, and the vocabulary that I still don't have, and learning
Mhm.
about all these things that I think are default, that I think are normal. Turns out they are not, and I have been lied to. And it's important for me to be like, okay, so since I've been lied to, what next? What am I going to do with that information? What am I going to go and look for next?
Right. Darn those old people. How dare they? Sigh and tea.
INT.
Yeah. Gosh. You're so good at talking, Julia. I miss
Thanks.
that.
Oh,
I miss
I
being
try.
around you.
I have 2 very expensive degrees in words. I like to use them.
You're using them very well. There's a reason you got those degrees. Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. If anybody here is watching this and they're not like aware of how amazing Jules is as a person, change your life somehow and make sure you figure that out. Um, gosh. Okay. You answered so many of my questions without me even needing to ask the questions, which
Oh
is
boy,
fantastic.
neat.
Yeah, so I'm out of things to ask you. Is there just, do you want to like continue talking about whatever you want to talk about? The floor is yours. Keep going.
Oh boy.
Also, sidebar, when you said queer babies, I imagined like little tiny, like chubby cheeked babies with like multicolored like faux hawks just sitting there being like, I'm queer. That's what I imagined.
I love that. And I super see, this is the thing, is that we could have that. We could have had that this whole time. How cute would that be? Yeah, so
Ridiculously cute.
super cute. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the I'm just trying to think of, like, what cool, stupid fun facts do I have about life that might be cool at this moment, and none of them are related to, like, identity. Uh, Kiwi birds are bigger than you think they are. They're not the size of kiwi fruit. They are roughly the size of chickens. Um,
Okay, I didn't know that. So
that's
there we
that's
go.
something that you know now. Yeah,
Oh, I got something.
there you go.
Recently, I was made aware of one of the referendums in Washington
Mm,
that was on the last ballot, and it was about having comprehensive sex education K through
yeah.
12 in the entire state, and it passed.
Yes.
So the first state down, talking about changing
Super
the
important.
right, changing the narrative.
Yeah,
That's one state that's decided that they're going to do it.
that's really great.
Now I don't know if that's ever going to happen anywhere else. Guys, I know like in Wisconsin that would be like no.
Yeah, yeah. We
Yeah.
have a lot of work to do, and
Hmm.
it seems kind of insurmountable if you look at the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the thing that I would want to leave people with, is that, if you have never asked these questions of yourself, if you have never looked into these politics, if you don't know the history, like, yeah, sure, it would be great if you did, but, like, it doesn't make you a bad person for not having learned this already.
Right.
Because a lot of that is actual, like, again, intentional societal erasure.
Right.
That's something that it's not just that it doesn't get talked about, it's that we, like, intentionally don't get told a lot of
Right.
these things.
Hmm.
And we get told other things instead that become the narrative, that become the, like, truthiness of the situation.
Right.
So it's a big job that we
Hmm.
have ahead of us, that, people have been, especially, trans women of color, but, like, people of color and indigenous people have been having these conversations, have been fighting this fight for a lot longer than white folks have been, on the
Even
same
aware of
page.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because of that, it can feel, when you are a white person coming into this conversation, like, oh my God, there's so much to do. Where do you even start?
Hmm.
We tend to get media narratives as white people of individual success, of
Hmm.
individual conquering the villains, conquering the
Right.
mountain, conquering whatever. And so that gives us this impression that we can make a difference as
Hmm.
individuals.
Right.
And yeah, also, people are already doing this work. You don't have to be the one to start doing the
Right.
work.
You can
People are
join the
already
movement that's already
you
going.
can you can join something that's already happening. It's not a personal glory thing. It's not going to be an individual hero thing, and that can be a little bit hard to swallow if the major narrative that you've been fed is that you have the, you can be the knight in shining armor, or you can be the princess, or you can be the, the dragon slayer or the dragon. Like, if the thing that we've been
Right.
told is that it's our story, it's hard to recognize the truth of being able to actually join in with somebody else's story, join in with a movement, or join in with a community that
Right.
is doing the work. And that's super important to be able to do. So it doesn't have to be one person trying to climb this entire mountain. In fact, that would be counterproductive. You would hurt yourself. It's okay. You don't have to do that.
Hmm.
It is okay to be intimidated by the amount that there is to do, by the amount that you don't know, by the immenseness of all of these conversations.
Hmm.
Literally all you have to do is take one step at a time.
Right.
And it doesn't even have to be a step that you plan out in advance. You can ask somebody else if you can go with them. Like, you can
Right.
go look for somebody who is already on that path, and you can just kind of quietly join in with them.
Yeah.
And so if things feel too big, if things feel, and what I mean by things, is everything that we've talked about. There's the systemic racism, there's oppression, there's politics, everything, identity, orientation, gender, all of it. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to do it yourself.
Hmm.
There are ways to break it down into manageable pieces and also recognize the parts that are not yours to solve.
Hmm.
So when you're talking about your own individual gender or your orientation or your identity, that's something that you can work on yourself. And resources exist. Other people exist. Communities exist that can help you figure out how to ask those questions, or how to answer those questions, or what to do once you have answered them. And then when you get to the larger societal issues, it's totally okay not to try and tackle the whole thing at once.
Yeah.
It would be better, in fact, not to do that, because although individuals are useful and are valid and are powerful, we make such amazing change when we work together.
Right.
And so finding a community can be the first step toward putting your effort into that pile.
Hmm.
And I think that, although it seems less impactful because of this narrative that we've been fed, where you have to do
Hmm.
the thing, you have to do all of the thing, and then the thing is done and you win.
Right.
Question that,
Hmm.
maybe disregard that, maybe look at other ways that that things are true, and it's less work overall and more successful overall to
Hmm.
recognize joining into the wheel that is already turning gets that wheel, which is our wheel, which is all of us, gets
Right.
that wheel
Going
to its
faster.
destination faster, more completely, and less painfully than trying to start your own little wheel,
Hmm.
which might veer into the big one and knock it off course or whatever. I don't know where I'm going with the metaphor, but join in with the people that are already doing the work, because that is less effort overall, and it's okay to be lazy on this one, because we're not supposed to fix it all by ourselves. We're supposed to fix it together, and it's okay.
Nice save from the metaphor.
Got
You did it. You
there.
wheeled that wheel back on course and made it all
Yeah.
work at the end. There we
We
go.
are back on track.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. All right. Well, Jules, thank you so much for talking with me, sharing your knowledge with the internet. And we should do this again.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing the other videos in this series also.
Yeah. There's one available right now.
Fabulous.
And then you'll be number 2. And I got another one coming next week.
Excellent.
So, and then I'll work from there, because like you said, I can't do it all alone, and it takes a long time to put all these together, it turns out.
There you go. Yep.
Because when I started, I was like, oh yeah, people totally just have time. And then I was like, people have lives. What was I thinking?
Other stuff going on? What?
Yeah. Even though they're stuck at home, they still have things to do? Darn it.
I have no idea what day it is ever, but particularly this month, because the first 2 weeks of November lasted approximately a year. And also
Yeah.
it's still April, so I don't know what's up with all of this weather changing
Oh,
and
I know.
stuff. But
Yeah. It
good
snowed here
job for
yesterday.
you for making the scheduling work.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very flexible these days.
Excellent.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks again. Bye, internet.
Bye, internet.
Bye.